now a big step forward for a bill that drastically changes the way Americans vote. In a mostly party line vote yesterday, House Republicans and one Democrat passed a sweeping overhaul of the country's elections. The Save America Act would impose strict new proof of citizenship rules, requiring documentary proof of U.S. citizenship for voter registration. Here with us now to discuss and better understand this legislation, the executive director and founder of the Center for Election Innovation and Research, David Becker. David, thanks for being here. So the Democrats argue this legislation is designed to disenfranchise Americans voting. I wonder what your assessment is on this.
I mean, I can't speak to the intent behind the legislation, but it's clearly based on this myth that there's widespread fraud out there in American elections, and we know there isn't. And that's not just me saying that. That's Republican election officials, Republican secretaries of state who've looked for this and found it.
Widespread is the key in that.
Exactly.
Sometimes there's fraud here and there,
That's
not
exactly
widespread.
right. I mean, there's a handful of cases what they found. They found a handful of cases of people who've been registered who were not eligible. They found a handful of cases of people voting when they're not eligible. But we're literally talking about single digits, sometimes dozens at the most, in an election in which 160 million people might be voting. The Trump administration has looked at almost 50 million voter records from states that were allied with them and looked for non-citizens on the list. And the Trump administration itself has found that 99.98% of them had documented citizenship, provable citizenship, and the other 0.02%, some of them are citizens, some aren't, but they couldn't get that. States are doing actually a really good job of this. And also, we already have voter ID to a large degree in the United States, thanks to the Help America Vote Act, which required that every single person who registers to vote has to give their driver's license when they register to vote. They have to give a social security number if they don't have a driver's license, or they have to show ID in those very rare cases where they don't have either. That's been around for almost 25 years. So our voter lists are as accurate and secure as they've ever been, and we are preventing fraud better than we ever have been. And so, unfortunately, if you talk to the professional election officials, this discussion that often happens in Washington on political grounds doesn't really get at the issues, and that's why the founders thought and the election officials think these determinations should be made in the states.
Which lies in the Constitution,
Exactly.
right? And I just want to be clear for our viewers who may not understand the distinction. Polls show that most people like the idea of photo ID, and of course there are different ways of what that actually means. But what makes the Save Act different is proof of citizenship, right? So you have to have a birth certificate or a passport. And Democrats, or those who are not in favor of this bill, argue this could disenfranchise, for example, women who may have gotten married and haven't changed their name.
That's exactly right. I mean, it includes both documentary proof of citizenship and ID when you vote. And the documentary proof of citizenship requires that you physically present yourself, not just do this online or they have to check through their official records. You have to physically present yourself in the documentation. And for so many millions of Americans, the documentation on their citizenship documents, like their birth certificate, is not going to match their ID now or their name now, for instance, particularly with married women. And so this is a real challenge. And the idea that we're going to make people show their papers repeatedly, when government could just get its act together, they already have the documentation. Most of us, when we go into the DMV and get a real ID in particular, most of us are presenting proof of citizenship. DMV already has that. Why isn't government using that to work better for us rather than forcing us to continually present ourselves physically and show our papers?
That's a very fair question. I also want to talk about what's happening down in Georgia. This affidavit, this FBI affidavit that was unsealed at the Fulton County's office where we saw that raid. They took 700 boxes or so. You look through that and you say it's a rehash, a lot of conspiracy theories. How was this signed off on?
I have no idea how it was signed off on. When I heard they were unsealing the affidavit, I was actually expecting, even though we knew there'd be no actual reality of a crime there, those ballots have been counted multiple times. But I was wondering what the administration would use that was new that would justify these claims. And there was nothing. There was no allegation of intent, which is a necessary element of the crime. In fact, they admit there's no intent that's evident at all. There's no allegation that there was an election theft even. In fact, they admit that those ballots themselves were counted multiple times and confirmed the results. There's no allegation of foreign interference or a foreign nexus of any kind, which again raises questions why the Director of National Intelligence was inside that facility during the execution of the search warrant. And finally, there was this 5-year statute of limitations. I really expected them to make some kind of claim about why that 5-year statute of limitations was told or was continued for some reason because of some subsequent activity. And there was no mention of the statute of limitations at all in there. And it really raises the question, given that these were conspiracy theories that had been resolved years and years ago, these were conspiracy theorists who were viewed as not credible by courts and others who reviewed the evidence prior. How did this not raise questions in the minds of the magistrate who signed off on the warrant? We're going to find out soon, because on February 27th, there's going to be an evidentiary hearing that a federal district court judge has called, and we're going to see Fulton County get a chance to probably solicit testimony from some of these individuals and find out what was actually going on.
All right, we will wait and see for that. David Becker, thank you so much
Thanks, Mel.
for your
One question,
analysis.
David, before you go. If you're a naturalized U.S. citizen, you were born outside the United States, but became a U.S. citizen through the process, the legal process, and you eventually got citizenship papers. If you don't have a passport, do you have to walk around with your citizenship papers?
You'll have to prove your citizenship papers whenever you wanted to make a registration transaction, register to vote, update your information, for instance. And there's an interesting gap in some of the naturalization processes that we've discovered recently, which is that the minor children of naturalized citizens automatically become naturalized at the point when their parents do. But often the Department of Homeland Security doesn't have as clear a record on that as perhaps others might, and the documentation might not come out in quite the same way. So this creates this whole new bureaucracy for the states to have to manage. It will cost a lot of money. It could disenfranchise people. This earlier version of this passed in a previous Congress, and it didn't have much luck getting through the Senate. I'm not sure if it's going to this time.
Thank you very much. And coming up, one-on-one